Just to give everyone kind of an idea of what's going on, I'm sure we'll have some more folks trickle in here over time. All of this is going to be recorded. We will send this out afterwards as well. So if you miss anything, or if you need to jump early, or you want to refer back to things or share this with other folks on your teams, absolutely feel free to do so. You'll see a follow-up about an hour or two after this with all of that information. So that should be pretty exciting. We also have some vaccine mandate templates that we have created that we share with a bunch of other folks. I believe that will be in the follow-up as well. Jamie, who's also on our side, will pop in here at the end of the talk here with some more information on what that looks like and that sort of thing. But we're going to discuss today with Haleigh, our friend and partner down at Hudl in Lincoln, about vaccine mandates and communications and strategies on how you may want to do that, as people are thinking about that more and more as these mandates are becoming a thing that companies need to adhere to. And we're obviously not going to, kind of politics aside and potentially, charged opinions aside. That's not what this is about. This is about communication in general, how to game plan around that, how to even think about it. I think one of the things that's pretty interesting, and I'll let Haleigh speak here on this in a bit, is that Hudl has done a great job of kind of being proactive with this and being ahead of the curve. So we reached out and invited Haleigh to discuss what they have learned about this, the good, the bad, and kind of otherwise, and hopefully other folks can learn from this, take some things both from the resources that Workshop is providing and the things that Hudl has done, and kind of move forward with communicating those things to your employees, and obviously taking those and molding them for what fits best for your company. But that's kind of setting the stage for what we're going to talk about today. And trying to get started, my number one thing is I want to obviously introduce Haleigh. Haleigh, thank you so much for joining us. I would love for you to give a quick introduction on yourself and your role at Hudl, and what Hudl is and does, and kind of the makeup of the team there.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking me to join too. It's just something I'm passionate about talking about, so excited to share some thoughts. Hudl is a video and data software company. So we also provide hardware as well. That's a new venture for us. We serve athletes from Pee Wee football all the way up through professional sports like the Premier League over in Europe. Like Derek mentioned, we're based out of Lincoln, Nebraska, but we actually have just over 2,000 Hudleys. That's what we call our employees, Hudleys worldwide. Most of them are going to be desk-based. And then we have our HQ in Lincoln. We also have 9 offices globally. And that's important to this conversation because we know that the pandemic isn't just in the United States. And this is something we've been talking about with all of our employees across the world. So we have Hudleys located in 20 different countries. Again, those 9 core offices, the largest concentrations are going to be Lincoln, Mumbai, the UK, and Italy. I'm our corporate communications manager. I've been at Hudl for almost 8 years. Started from support, have kind of worked my way as Hudl has grown and scaled into a corporate communications role. And my responsibility has been making sure Hudleys have the information that they need when they need it. My team manages the recurring communications like our newsletter and our biweekly all hands meetings. We also handle the one-off requests, so the things that are going to come from people operations or from our product team, and any corporate events that happen throughout the year. When I say my team, it's me and one other colleague. Her name is Liz. And right now we report into the marketing team. We used to be report into people operations, but that recently switched over into marketing. Which has changed a little bit of the resources that we have access to, which is awesome. So it's a little bit of the background of kind of like setting the stage for our company and where we're coming from there. Right now, we're all still mostly working from home, and Hudleys have the opportunity to work in an office if they want to.
Very cool. I appreciate that intro, Haleigh, and obviously as we worked with you over the past few months. It's been very cool to hear that. And Hudl has obviously seen some crazy growth. I know when you started, so you said 7 years ago, give it a sense of the size of the company then. And obviously you mentioned over 2,000 Hudlies right now, but how big were you then versus now? Obviously there's been some scaling changes. And before we get into kind of the vaccine mandate stuff, we'd love to hear kind of when internal comms got introduced into the company as well.
Yeah, when I joined, I think I was employee like 136 maybe. And we had 2 office spaces in Lincoln, Nebraska, and that was it. Then we quickly scaled to Omaha, and then to Sydney, and then the UK, and then Italy, and then we kind of just exploded, and we're everywhere now. When I started, we were corporate operations, and so I was doing things like managing our executive schedule. So there's a little bit of that executive administration side. I was ordering the office lunches, planning the holiday party, kind of like the grab bag of all of the things that no one else was doing. And then as we scaled, and particularly as we scaled globally, we realized, we need someone focusing on communication and making sure that our Hudlies have the information they needed. So we started shifting the focus towards that probably 4 years ago. And then 2 years ago, pulled off some of that operational things like the lunch management and our social events, and are now more of a core just communications team responsible for just the communications, less of the like physical employee experience. And as of the last month, pulling off some of those executive administration responsibilities, but still keeping that tie to our executive team really close.
That's awesome. And obviously seeing some crazy growth over the years, you've been a part of that. And in previous life was able to be a part of some of those fast growing companies as well. So those challenges are always interesting when internal comms and those things get introduced is very cool. And especially for the folks that introduce it early on, I think obviously it pays dividends. So we'll kind of fast forward in the life of Hudl and what the internal comms structure looks like to kind of obviously the topic at hand, which is the most recent mandates when it comes to vaccines, and particularly in the United States, and what that looks like. And it looks like for a company of your size of 2,000 folks across the kind of world. But I would love for a little bit to get a little bit of context. Can you talk to us a little bit about when you folks at Hudl first started discussing about the vaccine mandates, what the kind of implications were, and just what the very beginning of the discussions were before you kind of put a game plan in place, and what just those discussions look like, and what was talked about?
Yeah. So since the beginning of the pandemic, we've had a core, we're calling them the crisis communications team or crisis management team, which is our people operations execs, our CEO, our workplace operations, and myself. And then we bring in anyone else who's relevant to the discussions. So I've been fortunate to be part of these conversations from the beginning, which helps a lot with context. And when we're thinking about vaccines in particular, we started talking about them more seriously last May, which was when we started noticing worldwide people had easier access to them. So starting in May and then throughout July and August, we just kept pushing that encouragement message. We weren't really seeing the need for a requirement at that point, but just encouraging Hudlies, you have unlimited time off. We want you to use it. Encourage, go with your family, take the time off you need to be able to do it. Highlighting some of those Hudlies who had the opportunity to get vaccinated, and just kind of like laying that framework for, this is something that was important to our leadership, and we want to provide opportunities for Hudlies that it's also important to. And then starting in September was when we started to get really serious about discussing a requirement. So that was when the OSHA, I think they called it a mandate, or the OSHA ETS came out in the United States. And that same week, there was a mandate in Italy that came out that was similar. Theirs was a green pass mandate. So at that time, our leadership started getting more serious about, no longer is this just our decision. This might come in from above us, right? And we might be required to implement this. So at that point, leadership it's been bubbling within leadership. It's obviously bubbling within our employees' brains too. And so we said, we need to be transparent with our team at this point. So we held an all hands at that point and said, here's everything we know so far. Here's everything we don't know. And here's everything that's on the table. And with the everything that's on the table bucket, we said, it's very likely that this is going to happen based off of what we're seeing in the media and coming from the government. But it's really important to us that we're transparent and that we're letting you kind of like soak in that information. We did not want to take anyone by surprise. Like Derek mentioned, this can be a pretty political topic and people have some very strong feelings about it. So the last thing we wanted to do was, rip a Band-Aid off and shock anyone with any decisions that we made. So that was back in September, we first started really talking about it and then getting that information out to the team.
Yeah, that's great. I think, when we first started talking about this, the kind of pre-communication messaging that went out about, hey, this is what we're thinking about. We don't want to catch anybody by surprise. And rather than just saying, hey, here's a mandate, you're hearing about it for the first time here. I think I really like that a lot. I think, tell me a little bit more about the discussions that happened to basically go into communicating what that would look like. Because at that point, I'm sure there weren't a ton of details. You were kind of unsure of what you even needed to communicate, but why was it important for you to, kind of pre-communicate that you were thinking about it? And what were you kind of hoping to get across when you kind of just threw that out there? And then kind of secondarily, did you ask or kind of set timelines for when there would be follow-ups to that as well?
Mm-hmm. So we did set a follow-up and said, we didn't have a date for it, if I'm remembering right. It basically was like, when we know more from the government, we're going to follow up with you. And a lot of those early conversations, there's two parts to them. There's the logistics side. So like legally, how can we do this? How can we be compliant? What are we up against? Based on the guidelines that came out, are we required to, like we're over 100. We're also a federal contractor in some cases. So kind of like checking those boxes and working with our legal and our HR team to make sure that everything we're doing like is the right way of doing it. And then the other bucket of conversation we were having is, there's kind of two ways you can message this. You can come out really strong and say like, vaccines are the way to go. We're doing this, tough love, like you got to do it. And then the other side being really compassionate. I did a little bit of research and talked to some other local companies, and we decided that compassionate side was actually going to be more successful for us. Since the beginning of the pandemic, our number one message has been protecting Hudleys. Every decision we made came back to that. We need to protect Hudleys. So you could kind of wrap that main goal throughout the pandemic, tie that with the compassionate messaging and help to craft some lines and some speaking points that just back that up. Because we didn't want to get into the politics of it. We didn't want to get into like opening up that can of worms. We wanted people to understand the why behind why we were making this decision, not why, like broadly this is happening in society. We decided too that we wanted to be very careful with our wording. So we specifically have not called it a vaccine mandate because the way we've implemented it is not necessarily a mandate. It's just a requirement. If you want to be in our office, you have to have proof of vaccination. Your job's not at stake, nothing like that. Wanted to make it clear that we believe the vaccines are a powerful tool, but we also know that, you might not agree with that. And so leading with that compassion. I have like a lot of thoughts on this. Am I answering the right question, Derek?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay.
So as you folks were starting to get kind of more information on what it meant in terms of legally what you were required to do as an employer and that sort of thing, and you had pre-communicated that you were thinking about this, kind of logistically, what were the next steps that you did? You kind of touched on them already when it comes to figuring out where those legal things were, but when it came to communicating to employees, what were kind of the next things that you as a comms team or your HR business partners or your executives did? So you said, here's what's going on. You're kind of, the core group of people that are trying to create the messaging around this kind of goes back to the drawing board, gets all the information. What was kind of the next thing that you did to kind of communicate with employees or get ideas of where they were sitting with things after you kind of gave them the heads up that you're thinking about this?
We decided to do a pulse survey. So we surveyed just our team in the United States because that's who is going to be the most impacted team, just to understand who already could have proof of vaccination. If you don't have it, are you planning to get it? That was important to us because it wasn't going to influence our decision, but it would give us an idea of kind of, what are we up against administratively and what type of communication do we need to build out? So if people aren't planning on getting vaccinated, if they're not already, I think that changes a little bit of your messaging versus people who are planning on doing it, they just haven't done it yet. So that was very helpful for us in trying to just like level set, right? Like, what are we walking into? So we got that pulse survey out, we turned it around really quickly. And then we also started getting together our policy. So like the actual people operations, legalese policy, putting together an intranet page that laid out everything very clearly for our team. The actual like form, how they're going to submit this proof of vaccination, working with our security and compliance team to make sure that the way we're storing Hudl's information is secure, it's safe. Hudl's know that their data is going to be stored properly. And then so once we did that initial, like, here's what we're thinking about message, we did the pulse survey, and then we scheduled another all hands for the team when we knew our decision was made and we had all of the details ironed out.
That's awesome. And then so there's I think the makeup of employees at different companies can be very different, but can you give us kind of an idea of what you learned from the pulse surveys, what kind of that came back with? Obviously you're a tech company in the Midwest, so there may be obviously different viewpoints at any company of the size that you folks are, but what were kind of the survey results, kind of taking out any individual specific responses, but what were kind of the results? Was it what you folks expected? Was it, oh, we may have to cater the message a lot more towards a particular group than we thought, or was it pretty on par with what you expected?
I guess I didn't know what to expect going into it as far as results because we hadn't talked about this broadly very much. So we got 85% of our team responded, which was awesome for us. That's a very high response rate for our team. And of that, 88% were already vaccinated. So we realized any of the pushback we were getting was a vocal minority. So that helped to kind of shape how we expected these conversations to go and what we knew to equip our management team with. So as we were building out kind of all of these resources, our intranet resources and the process for people, we also built out management and HR speaking points. We anticipated that these conversations weren't going to come to our CEO, right? Like the average Hudley's not going to come to David and be like, I have some thoughts on vaccinations. They're going to go to someone they have a trusted relationship with. So we wanted that team to be able to have those conversations successfully. And this pulse survey kind of helped us understand how many of those conversations to anticipate.
Yeah, that's great. And so after you get the survey results back, you had an idea of how many of those conversations to anticipate, which I actually think is probably the crux of what you really want to know is, are we going to have a lot of conversations with people who are, maybe not okay with, what the situation is, given that it's not really your choice anyway, is an employer that's being brought down from on a government mandate. And so you get those results back. You then have a better idea of what kind of heavy lifting is going to need to be done or follow-up kind of conversations are going to be happening. But what were kind of the next touch points that you had scheduled out in terms of that? What was the game plan in terms of communicating what your actual go forward plan was when it comes to rolling this out? Who was kind of explaining it? What were the touch points? When did they happen? Would love to kind of hear those, a timeline of events that you had kind of scheduled out.
Mm-hmm. So we built, when I say we, it was like people operations handled the policy side and like the process side. And then my team helped with the actual wordsmithing of it. So we built out the policy, got all of our ducks in a row there. And then our CEO messaged that out to our VP team and said, here's what we're thinking with. I need you to poke holes in it. What are my blind spots that I'm missing? So then we could go back and reiterate a little bit. So that was like a day because we knew that there was a timeline on this, right? So we knew the ETS, I think, was going to be enacted. We anticipated December. So then you're kind of working back from that, like, it takes almost 5 weeks for someone to be fully vaccinated. So you need to announce it with enough time for people to marinate on it, to get fully vaccinated, to be in alignment for the ETS. So we had a pretty tight timeline, messaged it out for VP, turned on that feedback. From there, we messaged it out to our next level of leadership with the same messaging. It's from our CEO requesting feedback poking holes in it. This was also an opportunity for us to start compiling FAQs, because the same questions these Hudleys had, we could expect from other Hudleys. So we kind of did that trickle down through the layers to our management team and our HR team. And then from there, David, our CEO, posted the full message in Slack. And for that one, I believe I ghost wrote it for him. And then obviously he went in and kind of put his own tone and flair on it. Posted it to Slack on a Thursday. And then we had scheduled an all hands for that following Tuesday. It was important for us to give those couple days for people to sit with it. We didn't want people to react live in an all hands and have to formulate their questions and their opinions and kind of react off the cuff. We wanted people to be able to think really, really thoroughly on any questions that they had. And it's also important just with time zones and it being Slack. You never know who's online at that time. We put it in Slack instead of email because we wanted people to be able to thread questions in there as they thought of them too. So then that Tuesday, we had all hands. Our CEO presented the all hands. He went through the whole policy, gave a lot of time for questions at the end. And it was really important for us to have this come from our CEO so that Hudleys knew this is a leadership initiative. We're a united front. Our entire leadership team across the board is in agreement with this policy that we're rolling out. And then any questions that came up that were at company level questions, he could answer. But then we really were driving those one-on-one conversations to happen with managers or our HR team. So then following that all hands, we did an email, which was actually our first email we sent through workshop. Just reiterating everything.
Shameless workshop plug in there.
Yeah, shameless plug there. Had a very beautiful button. People could go submit their proof of vaccination and just gave a reminder of deadlines and timelines. From there too, so I think we all know that you can't just throw a policy out there and hope that people follow it. There was a lot of a feedback loop with our talent acquisition team. So any people who are in our pipeline for being hired, making sure they're aware of our vaccine requirement. And then with our HR team, they're having these conversations and we wanted to make sure that feedback was rolling back into that crisis management team. So we had just some avenues for that to happen as well. So it was a lot. The TLDR was like full survey, Slack message, all hands, email.
Awesome. And then, so as those kind of initial communications happened and you, and I really like the initial message coming from the CEO because it's not trying to hide behind, an HR person or whatever, because, showing that it's important and why those things are being done. And it's part of leadership, I think is important for it to come from the CEO. So as that initial message came out through those variety of channels, both through live channels, through an ability for people to ask some Q&A, and then also some follow-ups via email on your intranet pages. What were kind of the next steps after that in terms of people who had follow-ups? Obviously, you mentioned earlier that people aren't necessarily going to go up to David, the CEO, when you have 2,000 employees and ask them every single question. They may have quite a few questions, or they may think of things later on that they want. So what were the next steps kind of after what I would say are like the top-down level communications? What were the more did you have any kind of one-on-one type of communications or things where employees could talk with their managers or a dedicated HR BP or anything like that?
Yeah, at Hudl, we have, just as like a standing practice, all Hudleys have a biweekly with their manager. So every other week, you're sitting down with your manager. So we anticipated any questions would come through those. We had those manager FAQs and talking points ready for teams to have those conversations. And then we have Slack channels like for HR, for our all hands conversations. And I saw every now and then someone would say, hey, I have a question about the policy. Can I get a direct message? So we didn't create anything formal. We had these other channels that were already in place for those conversations to happen. And then when there were difficult decisions, so there's always going to be those employees that feel very strongly about something and they have some very strong feedback that needs to be taken to this crisis management team. That would get bubbled up through managers or through our HR team, come to the crisis management team for discussion and whether we needed to iterate on the policy at all. which has happened a couple of times based on feedback. So mostly they're happening, we're equipping that team to have those conversations, but we weren't going out and like scheduling time for anyone.
That makes sense. I think having a a set time and place for people to express concerns, whether it's about something like this, or policy, or just the ability for them to talk about their performance with their day-to-day job is a great place. So having that kind of open line of communication, regardless of what they have questions on, is super important. So you mentioned that you had intranet with kind of FAQs and some kind of like a central hub of this information. Tell us a little bit more about that. What's included on there? What were the things that needed to live on that page as you were kind of directing people to, if they had questions and things like that? But yeah, we'd love to hear a little bit about kind of like the hub of this kind of this information.
Yeah, I actually have it pulled up and I can show you all what our hub looks like. So our original COVID hub was like 85 pages long, and it had like literally all the things you could possibly want to know about COVID. And we realized no one's looking at this because it's too long and you can't find the information you need. So we parsed it down just to like the need to know stuff. It's a lot easier for me to keep this updated than not having to go through every single page when you change a number or a date. So we created this simple hub. It's on our main landing page when you get to our intranet. And it's region agnostic as well. So we wanted to make sure no matter where you're logging in from, you have your COVID information. And then it pops you off really simply to your actual policy. Makes it really easy for you to submit your proof of vaccination, written in very plain language too. That was a lesson learned. We had a lot of like the legalese kind of cover your butt language in some of our other policies, and this one we just wanted to make the right thing to do, the easy thing to do, make it very easy to understand and to abide by this new policy. So it's important for us to just like clean it up, keep it really simple.
Awesome. Cool. And so obviously on there is part of it, and you mentioned it earlier, but you have to collect, there's a couple of different things that you could do, but as part of it, getting proof of vaccination from your employees is something that you want to do. Obviously you saw a submission form, but talk a little bit about just kind of the tools and process that it looks like from there. When somebody hits that proof of vaccination form, where do they go? How do they make sure that their information is secure, that it's not being seen by other people that they shouldn't? Obviously there's some privacy that is included here, but what, like, get into the details, like how do people do that at Hudl?
Yeah, so we looked into a couple third parties to handle this, but ultimately chose to go with a simple Google form. So Hudley's, click on that form, you add your name, it's automatically collecting your email address, upload front and back of your Vax card. This is obviously going to be different for different countries. So like Italy has a totally different system. So it goes into this Google form. 2 people on our HR team have access to that. They download that proof of vaccination to a secure server. It's password protected. Those same 2 Hudleys have access to that. They delete it out of the Google form, and it just forever lives in this little secure box. We partnered closely with our security team again for this. They looked at our whole process front to back. I know it can be scary when you're like, I'm giving my data to Google. What is this? So we wanted to make sure that Hudley's knew like, this is cool. Like we got this, we checked all the boxes, it's secure. And then from there, making sure that anyone who needed this information only had the level of information they needed. So our workplace operations team who needs to know like, hey, this Hudley's in the office, are they actually cleared to be in the office? They could go to our people operations team, and our people operations team would just say, yep, no, like no other information needed, because we do have an exemption process as well. And like, everybody doesn't need to know if you're vaccinated or you have an exemption. They just need to know, can you be here or not? So making sure that all of that's stored really securely. And that was the simplest route for us, was Google Form server.
Yeah, sometimes simple is better, and it's people will overcomplicate it, but as long as you can make sure that it's secure, and that you have the information that you need to go on about work, that's what you need. So that's awesome.
I think the one hiccup we've run into with that is when there's guests that want to come into the office, because it felt a little bit itchy to us to have to request a proof of vaccination card from a guest. And we weren't sure from the legal and compliance side, like can or should we store that? So we had to create a different form and process for any non-employees visiting the office. And we just went with a attestation form for that.
Awesome. This is super helpful. So we have a couple more questions that we're going to ask Haleigh, and then we'll open up to Q&A. So if other folks have questions or anything like that, drop it in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll get to that here at the end. But I think you got 2 or 3 more questions with Haleigh, and then we'll open it up to folks. So if you do have something, get that in now. We'll make sure that we can touch on it here at the end. But so Haleigh, obviously there's as you communicated this and you have kind of a process in place now that you feel pretty good about it. Holidays are approaching. There are things like holiday parties or team get-togethers, and kind of in the era of working remote but having folks in the same physical location. There are things like holiday parties and team get-togethers. What was the communication or what was the communication about things like team get-togethers or company holiday parties, or things like that? Were there anything that you had to do special for that?
Mm-hmm. We actually discussed this a lot in that crisis management group too, it's funny to hear these types of events like bubble up to our executive leadership level, but it's COVID and these things are important. We decided to go with a region-based model because we know different regions around the world are just going to be in a different place for the pandemic. It's really hard to create a global policy because standards are different, comfort levels are different. You get into the tricky area of like proof for guests and can your kids come, but kids can't be vaccinated. Like it just got really messy. So we put it in the laps of Hudleys to do what they're comfortable with. So some of our smaller offices decided like as a group, we want to get together and we're going to go out to a bar and do karaoke for our holiday party. But overall, we provided a stipend for everybody in the company. You have these dollars, you can go out and spend them as you please. If you're comfortable, going to dinner with your partner and you want to, grab a nice meal and drinks and dessert, that's great. If you're comfortable getting together with your team and that's how you want to use your stipend, even better. Would love to see y'all get together, but mostly putting it on Hudley so that they can kind of judge their own comfort level, and we're not putting people into situations that they're not comfortable with. And I think I'm sure that everyone listening here has kind of been in that same mode for the last 18 months, I guess 2 years almost now, of just how do you get people together without making them uncomfortable, but still make them feel special? So that was kind of our workaround for that this year.
Awesome. And so as you were kind of creating the initial communication plan, did you anticipate any pushback from employees who maybe they were part of the vocal minority, maybe it wasn't the minority at all, but you obviously were like, there's a chance that some folks may push back on what our policies are about the mandate that has been that we are supposed to enforce. Can you talk a little bit about what that looked like and what you anticipated and what those communications should look like?
Yeah, so we absolutely anticipated some pushback from our employees. We've all heard the conversations happening in society, and we expected that those were going to happen within our walls as well. And again, our goal was just to push these conversations to that one-on-one level. They weren't going to be as successful happening company-wide. They need to happen with someone you already have a relationship with and who understands kind of like the context of your life and where you're coming from and can speak to you with that level of trust already built. And again, knowing our level of vaccinated Hudleys, it didn't feel worthwhile to have some of those difficult conversations company-wide, or even like country level wide, right? Again, it felt more important to have those one-on-one. And so the best thing we could do was speaking points and FAQs for managers and a channel for them to come to ask those hard questions that their reports are bringing up to them. And from what I understand, those speaking points were helpful. Again, we led with compassion within those speaking points. We didn't want anyone coming down and just kind of saying like, it is what it is. Like, you got to do it, man. We wanted those to be meaningful conversations that they're having. And if anyone wants to look at our speaking points or FAQs, I'm happy to share those as well. We worked with some other local companies to get ours put together.
Awesome. Cool. So last question I have, and then again, if there's any questions in the audience, we'll be happy to take those. So last question. So after you, obviously this is kind of an ongoing thing, but the initial conversations have already happened. The initial communications have already happened. Looking back, is there anything that you would have changed or that you learned from that you're like, oh, we thought that was going to be a thing, it wasn't, or we should have done this in a different way and learn from our mistakes, sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. My biggest lesson learned would be to have more preparation and more follow-up for some of our higher impacted teams. So teams like sales and support at our company, they like to be in the office together. Sales is obviously out on the road too. So they had a lot of questions about, do I have to be vaccinated to visit my customers? What about to travel? What if I just want to sit in the office? So these are teams that it's more important to them, this policy. So in hindsight, I would have worked closely with those teams' leadership to poke more holes in our policy and answer those questions in advance, and then maybe set up additional time just to talk with those teams and have that message come from the top down directly to those teams. And then again, having those one-on-one conversations more with them too.
Awesome. That's super helpful. So that's all the questions I have. Obviously, I put you on the hot seat. I think it's great for folks to come join this, learn from someone who's done it, figure out what has worked well, what hasn't worked well, and just kind of share those talking points. So I think Jamie is going to come back on here in a second. I'm not sure if we have any questions here. If you haven't asked a question yet, but you still want to, obviously we have a few minutes left here, but Jamie, anything that we missed here, or anything that we should make sure that we cover, or any kind of logistical things that we want to cover before we wrap up?
No, feel free to hop in either the chat or the Q&A if you have some individual questions that you would like to get answered. I have one off the top of my head. Kind of, what do things look like right now? I mean, has like the policy been fully put in place? How are you thinking about doing things like on an ongoing basis? I know even when you're like hiring new employees, what does that look like?
Yeah, our policy went into place November 1st. So we've had just over a month of it being in place. We actually saw numbers of in-office attendance tick up after having the policy in place, which is an indicator to us that people are more comfortable being around one another with this policy in place. We've had to so we still have our standing biweekly all hands, and we've had to, reiterate the message a couple times. People are still a little bit anxious about it. They still want to give a little bit of pushback. And they push back on our CEO in those all hands, and he's handled those questions really well and has continually just like, we're protecting Hudleys, we're protecting Hudleys, we're protecting Hudleys. And especially since the ETS hasn't been officially mandated, we keep getting that question as well. So kind of decoupling our decision from the OSHA ETS decision has been important too. Like, no matter what happens on that side, like, this is happening in our company and we need you to like separate those in your brains. And then now going into this new year, what does it look like globally outside of the US? Do we need to look at our policies in all of our other offices? How does it look for our upcoming event this June? We're hoping to bring the full company together in person and understanding what vaccines look like at that event. Can we hold that event how we want to hold it? Knock on wood, the pandemic will be, on the downward turn by then. Still having some of those one-on-one conversations too. And then again, with our hiring pipeline, making sure that people know as they're entering our hiring pipeline, like, here's our policy. Here's how your role would be impacted, like how often we expect your role to need to be in an office and if that's going to impact you, and making sure we're having those conversations early and that team knows of any changes to the policy.
Yeah, I love that. That's probably the thing that people might overlook a lot of times is obviously communicating this to your employees is important, but your prospective employees actually are going to need to know this too. And that'll be important for them to know before they decide whether they want to apply for your company or what the requirements are. It's obviously there's requirements for, here's what is expected of you in your job to do, here's the job description, but here's actually what we require as a company for kind of those other things as well. So I think that's the thing that people don't want to overlook for sure. What else, Jamie? Anything else? Any other, I'm not sure if I saw any questions in there yet. Must have done a really good job of hitting every single question that we could have asked, but we can also follow up after this too. I do see a couple of things in the chat of folks actually asking us here for the talking points. So I think for the folks asking on the talking points that you mentioned, we'd be able to send out, Haleigh, I think we should be able to add those to our follow-up email. Maybe Jamie, would we be able to squeeze that in?
Anything Haleigh's comfortable sharing, I'll add to the Google Drive along with our templates and the recording for today. And yeah, it looks like Pamela is very interested in FAQs, and Linda would love to have the speaking points. Are there any speaking points off the top of your head that you'd like to share that you felt like really resonated?
The one that keeps coming into my head is just like, we're just doing this to protect you. We're not trying to be, this isn't political, like kind of sticking to the facts with it. And if people have like, if you want to jump on a Zoom call with me, I'm more than happy to discuss this. You can hit me up on LinkedIn and I'd love to connect about it to kind of talk through some more of those speaking points. There was a couple speaking points about like, why do we think that Hudl is under the umbrella of this ETS? Like what boxes are we checking that makes us think that this impacts us? So making sure that you're really clear about that too. Why are we doing this now?
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of why questions. Great. Well, that's all I've got.
Awesome. So I think last thing we got, I don't see any other questions in here. So we will follow up with the documents we have here. We have the vaccine communications template, which will be going out. We'll get the speaking points that Haleigh had mentioned added into that follow-up email as well. So last thing I can think of is, Haleigh, obviously you mentioned if folks have further questions or would like to reach out to you or talk to you about this and kind of pick your brain on an individual level, you'd be open to that. So what is the best place for people to contact you if they want to reach out with further questions?
You can LinkedIn, or if you just want to email me, it's firstname.lastname@hudl.com, HUDL. I know there's a lot of vowels in my name, so take a screenshot of that if you need it.
I think we'll have it in the email too, so you can reference back there. So, and if you have any questions for us on the workshop side around our templates or anything like that, Jamie will be sending out the email. You can reply to her. You can email me directly. I'm Derek@useworkshop.com. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I think I'm the only Derek Holman on LinkedIn, and certainly the only one that works at Workshop. So that's pretty easy to find both of us too. So if you have any further questions or anything that you want to squeeze in here at the end, I think we'll hang out for another minute or so. Otherwise, be looking on that follow-up email from us with the recording, with all those templates and resources as well. And we'll love to hear from you afterwards to see what you thought of this, see what other topics we should cover next time. But thanks everyone for attending. I think this was great. Thank you, Haleigh, for participating with us. This was super helpful. I think you folks are really thoughtful about your communications, and I think it shows that in kind of the strategies and communications that you had come out. So it's great to learn from you and the team over at Hudl and how you've done this. So appreciate it. If you need anything else from us, obviously let us know, drop us an email or a LinkedIn message, and we'll respond to you.
Thank you all for having me on too. This was fun.
And then Jamie, you're gonna play us some music on the way out, maybe. I'm gonna give you the on-demand DJ.
I might have taken away your audio abilities when I shared.
Oh no.
Screen.
Well, I think we're wrapping up.
Give those back to you.
I think we're good. I think it looks like folks are jumping out. So thank you everyone for attending. We're gonna wrap this up, and like I said, reach out if you need anything.
You don't want to do like an impromptu karaoke session?
You don't want to hear me sing.
All right, sounds good.
All right, thanks everybody.